The wind on Galehorn did not just blow. It hunted. It sought out the smallest gap in a thermal seal, the microscopic fracture in a polyglass visor, and it pushed inside with the patience of a glacier. Stanley hated the sound of it. It was a low, atonal drone that vibrated against the ribcage, a constant reminder that the moon wanted them dead. He adjusted the seal on his left glove, his fingers stiff, despite the heating elements woven into the fabric. He was standing outside his medical habitat, a reinforced geodesic dome that looked like a blister of light on the skin of a dark, frozen world. The thermometer on his wrist display read -40 degrees. It was a warm day. "Heatline pressure is fluctuating again," Mara's voice crackled over his earpiece. She sounded bored, which meant she was terrified. Mara only used boredom as a shield when the numbers were looking terminal. "If the main valve in Sector 4 blows, we are going to be burning furniture for warmth by midnight." "Don't burn the furniture," Stanley said, shouting to be heard over the gale. "I still haven't paid off the loan on the surgical table." "You are worried about the table, Stanley. The aurora is spiking. Oren says the magnetic shear is off the charts. We are looking at a premature cycle." Stanley looked up. Above the swirling white dust of the storm, the sky was beginning to bruise. Ribbons of violet and violent green were tearing through the atmosphere, pulsing with a rhythm that made his teeth ache. This was the aurora, the atmospheric engine that drove the storms on Galehorn. But usually, it was a silent light show. Tonight, the sky was screaming. A sudden drop in pressure popped his ears. Then came the sound. It was not the wind. It was the howl. It started as a vibration in the soles of his boots, rising up through his shins to his spine, a resonant frequency emitted by the storm spire, miles away. The alien beacon was reacting to the aurora. For a human, the howl was a headache, a sudden spike in anxiety, a primal urge to find a hole and hide. For the native species, for the wolf aliens, it was a biological command. It turned sentience into hunger. "Get inside," Stanley muttered to himself. He turned toward the airlock of his tent. Then, the sky tore open. It was not a meteor. It was too controlled, too metallic. A shape blacker than the storm shrieked out of the cloud layer. It was trailing a plume of ionized plasma that turned the snow beneath it into instant steam. It was a ship sleek and predatory, the hull curved like the muscle of a flexing limb. A lupine interceptor. It hit the ice shelf 300 yards out. The impact did not make a sound at first. The shockwave moved faster than the noise. Stanley was lifted off his feet and thrown backward against the polymer canvas of his tent. The ground heaved like water. A wall of snow and ice debris rose up, blotting out the aurora, and then the roar arrived, a deafening crack that sounded like the planet breaking in half. Stanley scrambled to his knees, coughing, as ice dust filled his intake vents. His first instinct was to check the tent integrity. Green lights, still sealed. His second instinct was the one that had kept him poor and tired for 10 years. He grabbed his medkit. "Stanley," Mara screamed in his ear. "Seismic sensors just flatlined what hit us." "Ship down," Stanley yelled back, fighting the wind to stand upright. "Lupine signature. Close. Too close. Do not go out there. The howl is spiking. If there are survivors, they will be feral. If there are survivors, they are freezing to death." Stanley detached the safety line from the habitat anchor and clipped it to his belt. He pushed into the whiteout. Visibility was 0. He was navigating by the heat signature on his visor, a blooming red stain in a world of blue and gray. The wreckage was a scar on the ice. The interceptor had plowed a furrow 6 feet deep, its hull twisted and glowing with waste heat. The cockpit canopy had shattered. Stanley slid down the embankment, the heat of the fire warring with the biting cold of the wind. He reached the cockpit. The pilot was slumped forward, harness locked. Stanley wiped the frost from his visor and peered inside. It was a female lupine. Even in the wreckage, she was terrifyingly large. Her armor was matte gray, etched with the jagged silver insignia of the Admiralty. She was not dead, but she was close. Her breath was hitching freezing into crystals on the collar of her suit. A jagged piece of the control console had punched through her side, and dark violet-hued blood was pooling on the seat. "Hey!" Stanley shouted, banging on the warped frame. "Can you hear me?" The pilot's head snapped up. Her helmet was gone. Her face was angular, covered in a fine layer of pale fur that was currently matted with blood. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out so large that the irises were just thin rings of gold. She snarled a sound that had nothing to do with speech and everything to do with the predator at the top of the food chain. "Okay, you are alive. Good start," Stanley muttered. He reached for the emergency release on the canopy. It was jammed. He pulled his multi-tool, ignited the laser cutter, and sliced through the hinges. The metal groaned and gave way. Stanley grabbed the pilot by the shoulder straps of her armor. "I am going to move you. It is going to hurt. Try not to kill me." She thrashed her claws, scraping uselessly against the console. She was delirious, her body reacting to the howl pulsing through the air. Stanley hauled her out his boots, slipping on the slick hull. She was heavy dense with muscle and armor. He let gravity do the work, sliding her down the side of the ship onto the snow. The temperature was dropping fast. The heat from the crash was dissipating, and the gale was returning to reclaim the site. Stanley checked her vitals on his scanner. Core temperature was critically low. Heart rate was erratic, too fast fighting the shock. "Come on," he grunted, hoisting her arm over his shoulder. "Walk with me. The tent is right there." She did not walk so much as stumble her legs, moving on autopilot. Every few steps a tremor would wreck her body, and she would let out a low, guttural noise that made the hair on Stanley's neck stand up. The howl was getting louder. They hit the airlock of the medical tent. Stanley slammed the cycle button. The outer door hissed shut, cutting off the scream of the wind. The airlock pressurized, filling with decontamination mist. "Clear," the computer chirped. The inner door slid open. Stanley dragged her into the warmth of the habitat. He barely had time to let go before she moved. It was an explosion of motion. 1 second, she was a limp weight on his shoulder. The next, she had spun him around. Her hand encased in an armored gauntlet clamped around his throat. She slammed him backward. Stanley hit the central support pillar of the tent, hard enough to knock the wind out of him. He slid down gasping, but she followed him, pinning him to the floor. She straddled him, her knees pinning his arms. Her face was inches from his. Up close, the alien features were sharp, beautiful, and utterly lethal. Her lips peeled back to reveal teeth that were definitely not designed for salad. A low growl rumbled deep in her chest, vibrating directly into his sternum. Her eyes were wild. The golden rings were pulsing. The howl was rewriting her brain chemistry in real time. She wasn't seeing a medic. She was seeing prey, or a threat, or both. Stanley couldn't breathe. Her grip on his throat was crushing his trachea. He could feel the cold radiating off her armor, stinging his skin through his thermal layer. He needed to break her focus. He couldn't fight her. She was 3 times stronger than him, even wounded. He had to use the one thing the howl couldn't replicate: higher reasoning. He forced his hand to move, not to strike, but to tap the floor in a rhythmic surrender beat. He stared directly into her eyes, refusing to look away, refusing to act like prey. "If you are going to arrest me," Stanley wheezed, his voice strangled but distinct, "can it wait after I disinfect?" The sentence hung in the warm air of the tent. The sheer absurdity of it seemed to short-circuit the aggression loop in her brain. The golden eyes blinked. The growl hitched. She tilted her head slightly, a very canine gesture of confusion. Her grip on his throat loosened just a fraction. "Disinfect," she rasped. Her voice was rough, like gravel grinding together, and heavily accented. She spoke the trade tongue, but the words felt foreign in her mouth. Protocol," Stanley whispered, pointing to a sign on the wall that read, "Sterile Environment." "I run a clean shop. You are bleeding on my floor." She looked down at her side. The wound was serious, a puncture through the armor plating deep into the oblique muscle. The sight of her own blood seemed to ground her. She drew a shuddering breath, and the feral light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a wall of pain. She released him and rolled off, collapsing onto her back. She let out a hiss of agony. Stanley scrambled away, massaging his throat. He didn't run for a weapon. He ran for the trauma kit. "Do not move," he said, his voice regaining its professional cadence. "That armor is compressing the wound. If you take it off, you bleed out. I need to stabilize you first." He was back at her side in 3 seconds. He injected a coagulant directly into the gap in her armor. She flinched, but didn't strike. "Who are you?" she asked, staring at the ceiling of the tent. "Stanley, medic. You fell out of the sky." "I did not fall," she grunted, her pride apparently intact, even if her hull wasn't. "I executed a tactical descent." "Sure. You tactically descended right into a glacier." Suddenly, the red emergency light on the wall began to flash. The camp-wide public address system crackled to life. The speakers were old, and the voice that came through was distorted by static, but the authority was unmistakable. "Attention all sectors. This is Storm Spire Security. We have confirmed a hull loss event in Sector 4. Repeat, a hull loss event. All residents are ordered to shelter in place. Do not approach the crash site. Do not attempt salvage. Any contact with non-human biologicals must be reported immediately to Commissioner Rook's office. This is a Level 5 security alert." Stanley froze. His hands were hovering over her wound. The woman on the floor went rigid. She looked at him. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, hard calculation. "Admiralty," she said. "If your security finds me, I become a hostage." "I know," Stanley said. "They will trade me for concession rights on the heat lines. My crew." She stopped, her jaw tightening. "My capture would compromise the thaw accord." Stanley looked at the door of the tent. He could hear the hum of a snowcat engine approaching. A patrol. They were sweeping the perimeter of the crash site. If they found a lupine Admiral, and judging by the insignia on her shoulder, she was definitely high command in his tent. It wouldn't just be a rescue. It would be an international incident. Stanley would be an accomplice. "Get up," Stanley said. "I cannot walk," she said through gritted teeth. "Then crawl. Into the back. Behind the supply crates." She looked at him, searching for deceit. "Why?" "Because I have enough paperwork to do without being arrested for harboring a fugitive warlord. Move." He helped her drag herself behind a wall of stacked medical crates and thermal blankets. He threw a tarp over her, obscuring the gray armor. "Quiet," he hissed. "Breathe shallow." Stanley stood up, smoothed his tunic, and walked to the entrance just as the heavy fist pounded on the door. He opened it. 2 guards stood there, encased in the white polarized armor of the Storm Spire Security. They carried stun batons and sidearms. Behind them, the wind whipped snow into a frenzy. "Dr. Stanley," the lead guard said. His voice was amplified by his helmet. "We are doing a sweep. Debris field projected near your coordinates." "I heard the crash," Stanley said, leaning against the doorframe to block their view. "Shook the fillings out of my teeth. You boys expecting radiation? Should I be taking iodine?" "We are looking for survivors," the guard said, trying to look past him. "Or bodies." "Haven't seen either. Visibility is 0 out there. If anyone survived that impact, they are frozen solid by now." The guard took a step forward. "We need to check the habitat. Procedure." Stanley didn't move. "I have a patient in isolation. Viral pneumonia. Highly contagious. You want to walk in there with those vents open, be my guest. But you will be spending the next 2 weeks in quarantine." It was a lie, but a calculated one. Storm Spire guards were terrified of sickness. In a closed ecosystem like Galehorn, a virus was scarier than a wolf. The guard hesitated. He looked at his partner, then back at the swirling snow. "If you see anything, you will be the first to know," Stanley said. "Keep your radio on, Doctor. Commissioner Rook is declaring a martial zone." The guard turned and marched back to the snowcat. Stanley watched them go until the taillights vanished into the whiteout. He closed the door and locked it. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. He turned back to the pile of crates. "They are gone." There was no answer. "Hey," Stanley said, walking over. "Coast is clear." He pulled back the tarp. She was convulsing. The second howl had hit. This one was stronger. The aurora overhead must have flared. The vibration in the room was palpable, rattling the surgical instruments on the metal tray. The Admiral was curled into a ball. Her back arched her claws, digging into the floor mat so hard they were shredding the synthetic rubber. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. Foam was gathering at the corners of her mouth. "No, no, no," Stanley muttered. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Stay with me." She slashed at him blindly. Her arm caught him in the chest, knocking him back. It wasn't a conscious attack. It was a seizure. Her biology was warring with the signal. The howl was trying to force a sophisticated sentient mind into the architecture of a beast. "Kill," she choked out. "Kill it." She was hallucinating. She was dangerous. Stanley reached for his bag looking for a sedative, but he stopped. If he sedated her now with her heart rate this high, he might stop her heart. But if he let her thrash, she would tear her wound open and bleed out. He needed to anchor her. He needed to give her brain something to focus on, other than the noise. He moved back out of the range of her claws. He sat cross-legged on the floor, deliberately making himself small. He took a bottle of water and a chemical heat pack from the shelf. He cracked the heat pack. It began to glow a dull orange. "Look at me," Stanley said. His voice was low calm, a stark contrast to the screaming wind outside. She snarled, her body jerking. "My name is Stanley," he said. "I am a medic. You are in a tent on the South Ridge. You are safe." He slid the water bottle across the floor. It stopped 2 feet from her hand. "That is water. It is clean." He held up the heat pack. "This is heat. It is warm." He placed the heat pack on the floor midway between them. Then he put his hands on his knees, palms open. A gesture of total passivity. "I am not going to touch you," he said. "The noise is in your head. It is a signal. It is not real. You are not an animal. You are an admiral. You have discipline. Use it." She stared at the heat pack. Her chest was heaving. The golden rings in her eyes were trembling, dilating and contracting. She was fighting a war inside her own skull. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind and the hum of the generator. Then slowly, agonizingly, she reached out. Her hand was shaking violently. Her claws clicked against the metal floor. She bypassed the water. Her fingers curled around the heat pack. She pulled it to her chest, pressing it against her armor, right over her heart. She closed her eyes. She let out a long, ragged breath. The convulsions slowed. The growl faded into a whimper. She had chosen the heat. She had chosen the tool, not the weapon. Stanley didn't move. He didn't smile. He just watched. "Good," he whispered. "That is good." The radio on his desk chirped again. This time it wasn't the automated warning. It was a voice he recognized. "Dr. Stanley, this is Harper Sloan. Are you on the line?" Stanley crawled over to the desk, keeping one eye on the Admiral. He keyed the mic. "I am here, Harper." Harper Sloan was the mediator for the Hearth Assembly, the closest thing they had to a conscience in the government. She sounded tired. "Stanley, listen to me. Rook is moving fast. He is using the crash to push through the Emergency Preservation Act. He is claiming the Lupines are preparing for a ground assault." "That is insane," Stanley said. "It was one ship. It crashed." "I know that. You know that. But the people are scared and the howl is making everyone jumpy. Rook is setting up a security perimeter around your sector. He says it is to contain biological contaminants. He is shutting down the civilian transit corridors." He cannot do that, Stanley said, looking at the wounded woman on his floor. I have patients who need to get to the spire for dialysis. If he locks down the sector... I tried to tell him, Harper said. I cited the Thaw Accord. Section 8, freedom of movement for medical emergencies. He cut me off. He said... There was a pause and then a click, as a new frequency overrode the channel. A new voice cut in, smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. I said, Commissioner Halden Rook's voice filled the small tent, that in a storm security is the priority. Mediator Sloan seems to think a piece of paper can stop a blizzard. I prefer walls. Stanley gripped the edge of the desk. Commissioner, you are blocking my frequency. I am managing the airwaves, Doctor, just as I am managing the crisis. You are right in the middle of the debris field. For your own safety, stay inside. If you see anything unusual, you call me. Directly. Do not burden the mediator with details she cannot handle. The line went dead. Stanley stared at the radio. The silence that followed was heavy. He felt a gaze on him. He turned. The Admiral was sitting up. She was holding the heat pack against her side, but her eyes were clear. The feral hunger was gone, locked away behind a wall of iron will. He knows, she said softly. He suspects, Stanley corrected. No, she said. She nodded toward the ceiling of the tent. Look, Stanley looked up. He hadn't noticed it before because of the glare of the work lights. But there on the translucent fabric of the dome was a shadow. A small, red laser dot was dancing on the apex of the tent, painting a target. It wasn't a targeting laser for a weapon. It was a designator, a tag. They did not tag the tent because I am here, the Admiral said. Her voice was weak, but her mind was sharp. They tagged it before I crashed. They were not looking for me. Stanley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He realized she was right. Rook's men hadn't searched the tent with any real enthusiasm. They hadn't needed to. They weren't looking for a lost alien. They were waiting for Stanley to make a mistake. They are waiting for you to step outside, she said. Stanley looked at his hands that had saved 100 lives on this frozen rock, hands that had just saved the enemy of his people. Well, Stanley said, standing up and grabbing a bandage roll. Then I guess we are staying in for the night. He walked over to her, kneeling down with a fresh calmness. Let's get that armor off, he said, before you bleed on my clean floor again. She didn't fight him this time. Outside, the wind howled, and the red dot held steady on the roof, an unblinking eye, watching them in the cold. The silence inside the medical tent was heavier than the storm outside. The wind was still battering the reinforced canvas, a relentless physical assault that made the support struts groan. But inside, the air was still and thick with the smell of antiseptic and ozone. Stanley sat on a stool near the surgical tray, his hands clasped between his knees. He was watching his patient. Ava was awake. She had propped herself up against the stack of supply crates, the thermal blanket draped over her shoulders, like a ceremonial cloak. Her armor lay in a pile nearby, a heavy, dull gray shell that looked too large for the being shivering underneath it. Without the plating, she looked less like a war machine and more like a biological entity fighting for homeostasis. Her fur was matted with dried blood where the shard had entered, but the wound was sealed, now covered by a biogel patch that glowed with a faint blue light. She was watching him back. Her eyes, those unsettling rings of gold, were clear. The feral haze of the howl had receded, leaving behind a sharp, calculating intelligence that made Stanley feel like he was the one under the microscope. "You are staring," Eva said. Her voice was raspy, but the trade tongue was precise. She did not slur her words. "I am monitoring," Stanley corrected her. "There is a difference. Your heart rate is still elevated, 110 beats per minute. For a human, that is a jog. For a lupine at rest, I am guessing that is stress." "It is readiness," she said. She shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her side. I am Admiral Eva of the Third Fleet, commanding the heavy cruiser Voidwalker. I demand to know the status of my crew." Stanley stood up and walked over to the water dispenser. He filled a cup and held it out to her. She looked at it suspiciously before taking it. Her claws clicked against the plastic. "I do not know," Stanley said honestly. "The crash site is zero visibility. The sensors are scrambled. But I will tell you this, Admiral. If they are out there without thermal shelter, they are gone. The temperature dropped to -60 last night." Eva took a drink. She did not mourn. She did not cry. Her face hardened a mask of stone, settling over her features. "Then, I am the ranking officer in this sector. My mission parameters remain active." "And what parameters are those?" Stanley asked. "Invading a moon that is mostly ice and bad attitudes." "That is classified," Eva said. "State secrets." Stanley laughed a dry, humorless sound. "Secrets. Admiral, look around you. This is a medical tent. I have 3 heaters and one of them rattles. I have a box of bandages and a surgical laser that overheats if I use it for more than 10 minutes. We are trapped in a snow globe, while a psychopath with a security badge waits for us to freeze or starve. I think we are past the point of secrets." "You are a civilian," Eva said, handing the cup back. "You would not understand the complexities of the Thaw Accord." "I understand that the Accord is supposed to stop people from shooting each other," Stanley said, "and right now it feels like it is failing." He walked back to his desk and tapped the console. The screen flickered to life, showing a graining image of the exterior. White. Just endless, swirling white. But in the corner of the screen, the data stream from the camp's public network was scrolling. "Listen to this," Stanley said. He turned the volume up. The voice of a news anchor, smooth and practiced, filled the room. "Reports are coming in of increased lupine aggression near the storm spire. Commissioner Halden Rook has stated that the crash of the unidentified vessel may have been a prelude to a tactical insertion. The Hearth Assembly is debating a motion to suspend the free movement clause of the treaty for the duration of the storm season." Stanley muted it. "Tactical insertion. That is what they are calling your crash. They are spinning this, Eva. They are turning an accident into an act of war." Eva looked at the screen, her ears flattening against her skull. "Commissioner Rook is a fool. If the Admiralty wanted to take this moon, we would not send one ship. We would send the Howl." "The Howl is already here," Stanley said quietly. Eva looked away. "That is not us. We do not control the spire. That technology is old. Older than the Assembly. Older than the Admiralty. We just hear it better than you do." "Someone is controlling it," Stanley said. "The pulses are not random anymore. They are targeted." Before Eva could respond, a low, grinding noise came from the floor. It sounded like a giant metal throat clearing itself. Stanley didn't flinch, but Eva's hand instantly went to where her sidearm would have been. She found only the blanket. She hissed, baring her teeth. "Relax," Stanley said, not moving from the desk. "It is just the delivery service." The metal grate in the center of the floor, usually reserved for drainage, rattled. Then, with a screech of rusted hinges, it popped up. A head, covered in a thick, grease-stained wool cap, emerged. A pair of goggles was pushed up onto a forehead, smudged with oil. It was Mara. She took a deep breath, inhaling the antiseptic air of the tent. "Smells like bleach and desperation in here," Mara said. "My favorite perfume." She climbed out of the hole, dragging a heavy canvas bag behind her. She stood up, brushed the dust off her coveralls, and then froze. She saw Eva. Mara blinked. She looked at Stanley. Then she looked back at the 7-foot-tall alien sitting against the crates. "Great," Mara sighed. "An admiral, in my favorite disaster." Eva narrowed her eyes. "Favorite," Mara walked over to the desk and dropped the bag with a heavy clank. "I rank disasters. It is a hobby. Keeps me sane." The reactor leak of 24 was a solid 6 out of 10. The food poisoning incident last month was a 4. This, trapped in a storm with a wounded enemy commander, while the government tries to erase us. This is shaping up to be a 9. Maybe a 9.5 if the heating goes out. She is not an enemy, Mara, Stanley said. She is a patient. She is a political hand grenade, Mara corrected. And you pulled the pin when you dragged her inside. Mara unzipped her jacket and pulled out a small data drive. She slid it across the desk to Stanley. From Harper Sloan. She couldn't transmit it. The channels are monitored. She said to tell you the vote is happening in 48 hours. Stanley picked up the drive. The vote to extend the accord. The vote to kill it, Mara said. The hawks in the assembly are using the crash as leverage. They want to vote no confidence in the lupine delegation. If that happens, the Admiralty pulls the fleet back and the trade embargo begins. No more heat cells. No more medicine. We freeze in the dark. Eva made a low sound in her throat. If the accord breaks, my people will not just leave. They will secure the Stormspire. It is a holy site. We will not leave it in the hands of rule breakers. See, Mara pointed at Eva. War. Told you. 9.5. Stanley rubbed his temples. What else, Mara? You didn't crawl through 300 meters of sewage pipe just to deliver bad news. It is not sewage, it is the heat line maintenance tunnel. And it was 400 meters, Mara said. I brought you something from Orin. And something from Ketch. She opened the canvas bag. Inside were several canisters of nutrient paste, a few fresh power cells, and a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in synthetic cloth. Orin says the sky is wrong, Mara said, her voice dropping an octave. She looked around as if the walls had ears. He has been reading the aurora rhythms. Usually the howl syncs with the solar flares. Big flare, big noise. Simple physics. But for the last 12 hours the flares are small, tiny. But the howl is hitting peak intensity. Eva leaned forward. That is impossible. The spire is a resonator. It cannot amplify what is not there. Orin thinks someone is tuning the clock, Mara said. Someone is feeding energy into the spire from the ground, boosting the signal artificially. Stanley looked at Eva. If someone is boosting the signal manually, they could trigger a great howl, even without a solar storm. Eva's face went pale under her fur. A great howl, it would not just cause aggression. At that intensity, it causes neural collapse. It would wipe the mind of every lupine on the moon. We would be, she struggled for the word, empty. And the humans, Stanley asked. Brain bleed, Mara answered cheerfully. Stroke City. Orin says if they crank it to 11, the vibration alone will crack the habitat domes. Stanley looked at the bundle of herbs. And this, from Ketch, Mara said. He calls it quiet root. He said if the Admiral starts feeling the urge to rip your throat out again, she should chew on this. It suppresses the adrenal response to the howl. Mara paused, looking at Eva with a mixture of fear and pity. But he said to be careful. It is a depressant. If you take too much, your heart just stops. You go to sleep and you do not wake up. Eva reached out and took the bundle. She held it like it was a grenade. Poison, she murmured. Medicine, Stanley said. Everything is poison if the dose is wrong. Even water. The sound of the outer airlock cycling made them all jump. Stanley motioned for Mara to get back in the hole. Go. If they find you here, you are compromised. I live in a hole, Doc. I am already compromised. Mara saluted lazily and dropped back into the floor. The grate slid shut just as the inner door hissed open. It wasn't the guards. It was worse. It was work. 2 orderlies from the civilian sector rushed in, pushing a gurney. On it lay a young boy, maybe 14 years old. Piper. Dr. Stanley, one of the orderlies shouted. He was outside. He was trying to fix a loose panel on the greenhouse. Stanley was moving before the sentence was finished. He was at the gurney, his hands moving over the boy's chest. Piper was blue. His clothes were frozen stiff. Hypothermia, Stanley barked. Get his clothes off. Now. Get the warming blanket. Set it to 30 degrees, bring it up slow. If we heat him too fast, he will go into shock. Eva watched from her corner. She watched the human doctor transform. A moment ago, he had been a tired man complaining about politics. Now he was a machine. His movements were efficient, almost beautiful in their economy. He cut the frozen fabric away from the boy's skin. He checked the airway. He injected a stimulant into the carotid artery. "Come on, Piper," Stanley whispered, his hands massaging the boy's frozen limbs. "Do not do this to me. Not today." The boy was small, malnourished. A stray, as the station slang went. Useless to the colony's labor force. In the Admiralty, a whelp like that who could not contribute would have been left to the elements. Resources were for the strong. That was the law of the pack. But Stanley was pouring 500 credits worth of stimulants into a boy who had nothing. Eva watched him work for an hour. She saw the sweat on his forehead. She saw the way he spoke to the unconscious boy, a steady stream of encouragement. "You promised to help me fix the radio, Piper. You cannot fix a radio if you are dead. Wake up." Slowly, color began to return to the boy's cheeks. His chest rose and fell with a stronger rhythm. His eyes fluttered open. "Doc," Piper croaked. "I am here," Stanley said, letting out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "You are an idiot, Piper. The greenhouse can wait." It was flapping, the boy whispered. The wind was going to tear it. "Let it tear," Stanley said, smoothing the hair back from the boy's forehead. "We can grow more potatoes. We cannot grow more of you." Stanley settled the boy into a sleep cycle and turned down the lights. He walked over to the sink and washed his hands. He looked exhausted. He turned and found Eva standing right behind him. He started nearly dropping the towel. "You move quietly for a giant," he muttered. "Why?" Eva asked. She was looking at Piper. "Why what?" "He is weak. He adds no value to your survival. He consumes resources. Yet you fight for him, as if he were a high commander." Stanley leaned against the sink. "Is that how it works in the Admiralty? You break a leg, they leave you in the snow." "We are practical," Eva said. "The strength of the pack is determined by the weakest link. We cut the weak links." "Well," Stanley said, tossing the towel into the bin. "That is the difference, I guess. Humans, we are not a pack. We are a collection of broken things trying to hold each other together. Piper is not a weak link, Eva. He is my family. You do not leave family in the snow." Eva looked at him. For the first time, she did not see a soft, fleshy creature. She saw something else. "Discipline," she said softly. "What?" "It takes discipline to deny instinct," Eva said. "Instinct says, save the food for yourself. Instinct says, abandon the burden. You fight your instinct to save him. That is strength." Stanley looked at her surprised. "I just call it doing my job." "No," Eva said. She took a step closer. The heat radiating from her was intense. "It is more than a job. You are a guardian. We have a word for it. Kahal, the one who stands at the door." The moment was broken by the radio. It was the public channel again. "Citizens of Galehorn," Haldenrook's voice was smooth, persuasive. "The storm is intensifying. The alien threat is real. To ensure the safety of the colony, I am enacting Emergency Measure 7. Effective immediately, all sector command codes are transferred to Stormspire Security. All medical supplies are to be inventoried and prepared for requisition. We must centralize our strength to survive." Stanley stared at the radio. "He is doing it. He is seizing the supplies. He is going to starve the outer sectors to feed his garrison." "He is preparing for a siege," Eva said. "He wants to provoke a fight. If he controls the food and the heat, he controls the people. And if he controls the spire—" "He controls the howl," Stanley finished. They stood there in the dim light of the tent. The political maneuvering was no longer abstract. It was coming for them. If Rook took the medical supplies, he would find Eva. And if he found Eva, the war would start. We cannot stay here, Stanley said. I cannot walk far, Eva admitted. And the storm is too strong for travel on foot. Stanley looked at the floor where Mara had disappeared. We do not go over the storm, Stanley said. We go under it. He walked to the desk and pulled up the schematics of the heatline grid. He traced a line with his finger. Mara said she came through the maintenance tunnels. Look here. He pointed to a junction box on the map. This is the main artery. It runs from the geothermal plant past our sector and directly into the foundation of the storm spire. Eva looked at the map. It will be guarded. The main entrances, yes. But Mara found a breach. A service hatch that isn't on the official blueprints. If we can get into that tunnel, we can get to the spire. To surrender? Eva asked. No, Stanley said. His voice was hard now. To stop him. You said the spire is a resonator. Can you shut it down? If I can reach the core, Eva said. I can disrupt the harmonic sequence. I can silence the howl. Then that is the plan, Stanley said. We go to the spire. We turn off the noise. And we stop Rook from turning this moon into a graveyard. Eva looked at him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bundle of quiet root. She broke off a piece and put it in her mouth, chewing slowly. Her eyes never left his face. You are suggesting we infiltrate a fortified military installation, bypass the security of both our governments, and sabotage a holy artifact, Eva said. Pretty much, Stanley said. Unless you have a better idea. Eva swallowed the bitter root. A faint smile touched her lips. It was a terrifying expression, full of sharp teeth and dark humor. I like this plan, she said. It is a disaster. A 9.5. Stanley grabbed his medkit. He checked the charges on his laser scalpel. He looked at Piper, sleeping peacefully under the warming blanket. He wrote a quick note and taped it to the boy's chest. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but Mara. He turned back to Eva. Let's go. One thing, Eva said. If the howl hits while we are in the tunnel, if I lose control. I have the suppressants, Stanley said. That is not enough, Eva said. She reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was iron. If I turn, if I become the beast, you must not hesitate. You must end me. Stanley looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at the claws that could disembowel him in a second. Then he looked up at her eyes. We are saving lives today, Admiral, Stanley said. Including yours. That is the deal. Politics can count the bodies later. He pulled his arm free, but he did not pull away. He held the door to the maintenance hatch open. Ladies first. Eva looked at the dark hole in the ground. Then she looked at the human who was inviting her into the dark. You are a strange creature, Doctor, she whispered. She dropped into the tunnel. Stanley followed, pulling the grate shut above them. The tent was empty again, save for the sleeping boy and the red laser dot still dancing on the roof, waiting for a target that had already slipped away. The world beneath the ice did not sleep. It sang. To the uninitiated, the heat-line tunnels of Galehorn were just a labyrinth of industrial conduits, a dark web of ceramic and titanium pipes, carrying geothermal fluid from the mantle to the surface habitats. But to those who walked them, they were a living organ. As the temperature on the surface plunged with the approaching storm, the permafrost squeezed the tunnels. The metal contracted. The ceramic linings groaned. The sound was a constant, multi-tonal wail, a screech of tortured alloy that echoed down the miles of darkness. The engineers called it thermal stress. The locals called it the tunnel choir. Dr. Stanley adjusted the strap of his medical bag, the leather, digging into his shoulder. He was walking point, his boots splashing through a shallow stream of condensation that ran down the center of the catwalk. Behind him, the small group of refugees moved in a tight, terrified knot. Keep the light discipline, Stanley whispered, his voice barely carrying over the singing pipes. If you can see your feet, the sensors can see you. Eva walked beside him. She had discarded the thermal blanket, moving now in just her damaged undersuit and the remnants of her armor. In the dim red glow of the emergency strip lighting, she looked like a phantom. Her golden eyes were constantly scanning the shadows, her ears swiveling toward every pop and hiss of the steam valves. "This architecture is inefficient," Eva murmured. She ran a clawed hand along a rusted support strut. "You pump heat through uninsulated corridors. You lose 30% of your thermal energy before it reaches the habitats." "We call it ambient heating," Stanley said, keeping his eyes on the motion tracker in his hand. "It keeps the sewage from freezing, and it keeps the maintenance crews from dying. Usually. When there is not a maniac trying to hunt them down." Behind them, Mara was bringing up the rear, her multi-tool dismantled and reassembled into a makeshift signal jammer. Oren, the young Aurora reader, was walking with his eyes closed, his hand trailing against the wall, feeling the vibrations of the storm raging miles above their heads. Ketch, the lupine herbalist, was carrying Piper on his back. The boy was awake but weak, his breath coming in small white puffs. "The rhythm is changing," Oren whispered. His voice was dreamy, detached. "The choir is getting louder. The ice is squeezing harder." "How long until the next pulse?" Stanley asked, not looking back. "Soon," Oren said. "The sky is breathing in." They were 3 miles from the storm spire. The journey had been a nightmare of claustrophobia and evasion. Halden Rook had been thorough. His security teams were not just guarding the gates. They were sweeping the arteries. Stanley stopped. He held up a fist. The group froze instantly. Ahead, at the junction where the tunnel split toward Sector 9, a beam of harsh white light cut through the steam. "Patrol," Stanley hissed. "Down, into the drainage channel." It was a miserable hiding spot, a 3-foot depression running beneath the main pipes, filled with brackish water and sludge. But it was shielded by the bulk of the main heat line. Stanley slid into the muck, dragging Eva down with him. The others followed, pressing their bodies against the cold metal of the pipe. Mara killed the jammer to avoid spiking the patrol scanners. Silence fell heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sloshing of boots in the water and the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the heartline next to their heads. 2 guards walked past on the grating above. Stanley could see them through the mesh, heavy boots, white armor, the distinct hum of charged stun batons. "Check the valves," one guard said. His voice was distorted by his helmet speakers. "Commissioner wants a full pressure report." "Waste of time," the second guard grumbled. "If the doctor is down here, the rats have already eaten him. No one survives the tunnels during a whiteout." "Just check the valves, and keep an eye out for the wolf. The order is shoot on sight, no capture." Stanley felt Eva tense beside him. Her muscles coiled like steel cables under her skin. She was preparing to launch herself through the grate to tear the threat apart before it could execute her. Stanley reached out and placed his hand over hers. He didn't grip it. He just rested it there. A reminder. Anchor. Eva looked at him. In the darkness, her eyes were luminous. She held his gaze. She did not attack. She breathed a slow, controlled inhalation through her nose and forced her body to go limp. The guards lingered for a long minute, their lights sweeping over the sludge below. One beam passed inches from Stanley's face. He didn't blink. "Clear," the first guard said. "Moving to Junction 5. The boots crunched away. The door to the next section clanged shut. Mara let out a long, shuddering breath. "If we die down here," she whispered, wiping slime off her goggles. "I want it on record that I hated tunnels. I hate the smell. I hate the damp. And I specifically hate the part where I am lying in toxic sludge." Eva sat up, shaking the water from her fur with a quick, violent motion that sprayed everyone nearby. "Noted," she said, her voice dry and devoid of sympathy. "Your complaint will be archived in the official mission log, under unnecessary grievances." Mara stared at her. "You are funny. You know that for a 7-foot killing machine, you are a riot." I am efficient, Eva said. Humor is just a byproduct of truth. Let's move, Stanley said, climbing out of the channel. They are checking valves. That means they are looking for pressure drops. If we stay in one place too long, our body heat will spike the local sensors. They pushed deeper. The tunnel narrowed. The pipes became denser, weaving around them like the roots of a metallic tree. The air grew hotter, heavier. They were getting closer to the source. Ketch the herbalist suddenly stopped. He was a smaller lupine, older, with gray fur around his muzzle, and a collection of pouches and vials strapped to his chest. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. Wait, Ketch said. He moved toward a ventilation grate set into the wall. It was an intake vent, pulling air from the surface to cool the heat lines. Ketch pulled a small scraper from his belt and ran it along the rim of the vent. He came back with a fine orange dust on the blade. What is that? Stanley asked. Rust. No, Ketch said. He tasted the air again, then spat on the floor. Spice, pheromones. We call it blood scent in the trade, or howl dust. Eva's eyes widened. She took a step back, covering her nose and mouth with her arm. Do not breathe it. It is a catalyst. A catalyst for what? Stanley asked, though he already suspected the answer. For the instinct, Ketch said grimly. This is synthesized adrenal trigger. It lowers the neural barrier. It makes the howl louder in the blood. It makes us suggestible. Stanley looked at the ventilation shaft. It led straight up to the surface intake systems. Someone is dusting the air supply, he said. They are pumping this stuff into the ventilation grid. Rook, Mara spat. He is not just waiting for the howl to drive people crazy. He is drugging them to make sure it happens. It creates fear, Eva said, her voice muffled behind her arm. If the lupines in the sector breathe this, they will lose control faster. They will attack. And Rook will have his justification to purge the camp. Suddenly, the tunnel shook. It wasn't a physical tremor. It was a sonic one. The pipes screamed in unison, a high-pitched harmonic that drove a spike of pain through Stanley's eardrums. The howl. Oren grabbed his head, sinking to his knees. Here it comes. It is a big one. The sound slammed into them. It was a physical weight, a pressure wave of psychic aggression. Stanley felt his own heart rate spike, a sudden wash of irrational anger, but for him, it was manageable. For the lupines, it was a command. Ketch dropped Piper and scrambled back against the wall, digging into his pouch for the quiet root. He shoved a handful of the bitter herbs into his mouth, chewing frantically. But Eva was the target. She was a resonant, a high-functioning biological receiver. The dust in the air and the sound in the walls hit her like a hammer. She cried out a sound that started human and ended as a roar. She fell against the heat line, her claws screeching across the titanium. Her back arched. The muscles in her neck stood out like cords. Ava! Stanley lunged for her. Stay back, she snarled. But it wasn't a warning. It was a plea. She was trying to protect him from herself. She turned, slamming her fist into the pipe. The metal dented. She was vibrating her body, fighting a war against the signal. Her eyes were rolling back the gold, consuming the white. The order, she gasped. Kill, secure, kill. She spun around, her gaze locking on Stanley. There was no recognition there. Only the predator identifying the prey. She crouched, ready to spring. Stanley didn't run. He didn't pull the stun baton he had taken from the crash site. He reached into his medical bag and pulled out a syringe. It was the suppressant cocktail he had synthesized from Ketch's herbs and his own supply of sedatives. Hold her! Stanley shouted to Mara. Are you kidding? Mara yelled, backing away. She will rip my arms off. Do it! Mara cursed and threw herself at Eva's legs. It was like tackling a tree trunk, but it threw the Admiral off balance for a split second. Stanley stepped into the danger zone. He moved inside her reach, dodging a swipe that would have taken his head off. He slammed the syringe into the junction between her neck and shoulder armor. He depressed the plunger. Eva roared, grabbing Stanley by the front of his parka. She lifted him off the ground, slamming him against the tunnel wall. Stanley's head cracked against the concrete. Stars exploded in his vision. He could feel her hot breath on his face, smell the ozone and blood scent. "Ava!" he choked out. He grabbed her wrists, not trying to break her grip, but holding on. "Ava, look at the scar." He didn't know why he said it. It was instinct. She froze. Her eyes, burning with the golden fire of the howl, dropped to his chest. Through the open collar of his parka, the top of his old burn scar was visible. The symbol on his skin, the geometric pattern he had carried since the accident that killed his squad 10 years ago, seemed to pulse in time with the howl. Eva blinked. The sight of the mark disrupted the signal. It was a key that didn't fit the lock of her rage. "Stanley," she whispered. The gravel was leaving her voice. "I am here," Stanley said, his voice trembling but gentle. "I am right here. You are not a weapon. You are Eva. Come back." The drug hit her system. Her pupils contracted. The strength drained out of her arms and she dropped him. Stanley landed on his feet, catching her as she collapsed. He lowered her to the floor, sitting with her back against the cool concrete of the drainage wall. "I almost," she panted, her whole body shaking with the aftershocks. "I almost took you." "Almost counts in horseshoes and hand grenades," Stanley said, wiping a trickle of blood from his forehead. "Not in medicine." He looked up. The tunnel had stopped screaming. The pulse had passed. Ketch was helping Piper stand up. Oren was weeping silently, the psychic pressure having overwhelmed his sensitive mind. Stanley checked Eva's pulse. "The suppressant will hold for an hour, maybe less if the dust concentration gets higher. We need to move." "The spire," Eva said, struggling to stand. "We have to stop the signal. It is not just the dust. The beacon is looking for something." "What is it looking for?" "A receiver," Eva said. She looked at Stanley's chest, then quickly looked away. "A master key." They pressed on. The tunnel widened, opening into a subterranean service node. This was the junction point, the place where the heat lines from the colony met the massive intake valves of the storm spire. It was a cavernous space filled with the roar of machinery. In the center stood a massive blast door, sealed with the insignia of the Joint Hearth-Lupine Treaty Authority. "This is it," Stanley said. "The back door to the spire." "It is locked," Mara said, plugging her datapad into the control panel. "And it is not a keypad lock. It is biometric, and it is encrypted with a rolling code." "Can you crack it?" "I can crack a nut with a sledgehammer," Mara muttered, typing furiously. "But this is military grade. If I force it, I might trigger the silent alarm." "Trigger it," Eva said. "They already know we are here." Stanley looked at the control interface. It wasn't a standard console. It had a hand scanner, but the scanning plate was shaped strangely. It wasn't flat. It was concave with raised nodes arranged in a geometric spiral. Stanley stared at it. He felt a phantom itch on his chest. He unzipped his parka. He pulled down the collar of his thermal shirt. The scar on his pectoral muscle, a burn he had received pulling a fusion core out of a collapsing reactor a decade ago, was an exact mirror of the scanner plate, the spiral, the nodes, the... "Stanley," Mara asked, looking up from her screen. "What are you doing?" "I have seen this pattern," Stanley said softly. "I have worn it for 10 years. He reached out. "Do not touch it," Eva warned, stepping forward. But Stanley didn't listen. He felt a pull, a magnetic attraction that bypassed his logic. He pressed his hand palm open against the scanner. He didn't need to touch the skin. The scanner read the bioelectric field. The machine hummed. A blue light washed over his hand. "Access granted. Resonant signature confirmed. Welcome Asset 404. The blast door groaned. The locking bolts retracted with a sound like gunshot. The heavy steel slid open. The group stood in stunned silence. "Asset," Mara whispered. "Stanley, Why does the alien murder tower think you are an asset? Stanley stared at his hand. He was shaking. I do not know. I was a medic. I was just a medic. We do not have time for existential dread, Eva said, though her eyes were filled with a new, terrified respect. We are in. They moved into the airlock beyond. This was the sub-level of the storm spire. The architecture changed instantly. Gone were the rusted human pipes. Here the walls were made of a dark obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb the light. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and ancient dust. They found a terminal in the antechamber, a logistics node used to monitor the beacon's output. Mara, Stanley said, his voice hard. Get the logs. I want proof. I want to know who is turning the dial. Mara jacked in. I am scraping the buffer. Hold on, okay, I have got the modulation history. She pulled up a holographic display. It showed a graph of the howl's intensity over the last week. It was a jagged line of escalation. Look at the timestamps, Mara pointed. Every spike correlates with a manual override command. Who authorized it? Stanley asked. Mara tapped a few keys. Authorizing Officer ID Commissioner Halden Rook. Countersigned by nobody. He bypassed the dual-key protocol. He broke the treaty, Harper Sloane's voice crackled over the radio. Stanley tapped his earpiece. Harper, you are breaking up. I am on the emergency channel, Harper said. Her voice was thin, stressed. Stanley, listen to me. The vote is over. The Assembly just authorized the Emergency Preservation Act. Rook has full martial law. He just issued a colony-wide broadcast. Put it on, Stanley said. Mara routed the audio through the terminal speakers. Halden Rook's voice filled the obsidian chamber. It was calm, authoritative, the voice of a man who was saving the world by destroying it. Citizens of Galehorn, the storm is upon us. The alien threat has infiltrated our very infrastructure. To ensure the survival of our species, we must take decisive action. Tonight, we will initiate the Great Howl Protocol. This is not an attack. It is a cleansing. We will flush the aggression from the atmosphere. We will stabilize the resonance. Stay in your homes. Remain calm. Order is being restored. He is lying, Eva said, her fists clenching. He is not flushing the aggression. He is weaponizing it. A great howl will incapacitate every lupine on the planet. It will leave us comatose. He creates a coma, and he calls it peace. He is going to wipe out half the population to save the other half, Stanley said, and he is using the treaty to do it. We have the logs, Mara said, pulling the data drive. This proves he is manipulating the beacon manually. If we broadcast this, the Assembly will have to arrest him. We cannot broadcast from here, Oren said, looking at the obsidian walls. This rock blocks all transmission. We have to get to the core, to the transmitter array. Then we go up, Stanley said. They left the antechamber and ran toward the main lift. The spire hummed around them, a living thing waking up for the kill. The floor vibrated. The great howl was charging. They reached the doors to the central core. This was it. Behind these doors lay the beacon itself. Stanley hit the release. The doors slid open. They didn't find an empty room. The core chamber was vast, a cathedral of black stone and blue light. In the center, a massive crystal pillar pulsed with energy, the beacon. It was beautiful and terrifying. And standing on the walkway between them and the beacon was a phalanx of security drones. In front of the drones stood Commissioner Halden Rook. He was wearing a thermal greatcoat, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked perfectly at ease, as if he were waiting for a dinner guest, not a group of rebels covered in tunnel slime. He looked at the group. He looked at Eva, towering and furious. He looked at Mara, clutching her datapad. Finally, his eyes landed on Stanley. He smiled, a thin, icy expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Doctor," Rook said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You look terrible." Stanley stepped forward, shielding the others. "It is over, Halden. We have the logs. We know you are juicing the signal. Rook chuckled. He tapped a command on his wrist comp. The drones raised their weapons. Of course I am juicing the signal, Stanley. Someone has to make the hard choices while you play hero in the snow. Rook took a step forward. He pulled a heavy pistol from his coat. You are not here to stop me, Doctor, Rook said softly. You are here because you are the only one who can finish what I started. You felt it at the door, didn't you, the pull? Stanley felt the scar on his chest burn hot, a brand reacting to the presence of the beacon. Rook raised the gun, pointing it not at Stanley, but at Eva. You are late for your appointment with History, Doctor, Rook said. Now step away from the animal, or I will put her down before the howl does it for me. The escape from the storm spire had been a blur of steam and violence. When the heat line ruptured thanks to a well-placed charge from Mara's modified multi-tool, the resulting explosion of superheated vapor had blinded the drones just long enough. Halden Rook had flinched, and in that split second of hesitation, Eva had moved. She had not killed him. The Admiral did not kill purely for spite when survival was the priority. She had simply collapsed the walkway with a kinetic strike, dropping a wall of obsidian debris between the Commissioner and his prey. Now that chaos felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. They had retreated deep into the subterranean ice shelf, guided by Oren's innate sense of magnetic north and Mara's encyclopedic knowledge of structural anomalies. They found it 3 miles south of the main grid, the Lantern. It was not a building. It was the carcass of an old colony transport ship, a relic from the first landing 50 years ago. It had crashed during the initial surveys and had been swallowed by the shifting glaciers. Now it hung suspended in a cavern of blue ice, its hull breached, but its fusion core miraculously stubbornly still, humming with a faint, low-grade warmth. Inside, the air smelled of recycled ozone and freeze-dried dust. But it was warm, and for the first time in 48 hours, it was safe. Dr. Stanley stood in what used to be the cargo hold. They had turned it into a makeshift living room. The metal floor was covered in thermal tarps. A portable heater salvaged from the tunnels glowed a cheerful orange in the center. "Check the seals again," Stanley said, his voice raspy from the dry air. "I have checked them 3 times, Doc," Mara called out from the upper gantry. She was welding a patch over a hairline fracture in the hull. "This ship is tighter than a drum. The ice around us acts as insulation. We are basically living inside a thermos." "Check them a 4th time," Stanley said. "Rook knows we are alive. He will be scanning for heat leaks." Stanley sat down heavily on a crate. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. Not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. He clenched them into fists, forcing the tremors to stop. The rule he had established an hour ago echoed in his head. No one shakes alone. A small, cold hand slid into his. Stanley looked up. It was Piper. The boy looked better. His color had returned, and he was wearing a scavenged flight jacket that was 3 sizes too large for him. "You are shaking, Doctor," Piper said seriously. Stanley exhaled, letting his shoulders drop. He squeezed the boy's hand. "Just a little, Piper. It is the engine vibration." "The engine is off," Piper said. "It is fear. You told me fear burns glucose. You should eat." Stanley managed a weak smile. "I am creating a monster. You sound just like me." "I am practicing," Piper said. He pulled a nutrient bar from his pocket and handed it to Stanley. "Eat. Then we need to change the dressing on the Admiral's side. The biogel is turning gray. That means it is saturated." Stanley looked across the hold. Eva was sitting near the heater, her legs crossed in a meditative pose. She had stripped off the ruined remnants of her armor. She wore only a simple gray tunic they had found in the ship's lockers. Without the plating, without the rank insignia, she looked smaller, yet somehow more substantial. She was staring into the heater coils, her golden eyes unblinking. She was holding a piece of Ketch's quiet root between her fingers, but she wasn't eating it. She was just holding it like a talisman. You are right, Stanley said to Piper. Let's go bother the Admiral. They walked over. Eva did not look up as they approached. Your heart rate is steady, Doctor, Eva said, but your cortisol levels smell high. Occupational hazard, Stanley said, kneeling beside her. Piper says we need to check your wound. May I? Eva nodded once. She lifted the hem of the tunic. The wound was closing the alien physiology knitting flesh together at a speed that always made Stanley jealous as a physician. But the edges were angry and red. It hurts, Piper observed. Pain is data, Eva said automatically. It informs the body of damage. It also hurts, Piper insisted. He reached into the medical kit Stanley had set down. He pulled out a spray bottle of analgesic mist. This will make it cold for a second. Then it stops stinging. Eva watched the boy. Her expression was unreadable. In the Admiralty, a child who spoke out of turn to a superior officer would be disciplined. Here, the child was offering to take away her pain. Proceed, Eva said. Piper applied the mist with steady hands. He cleaned the wound, applied fresh gel, and taped the bandage smooth. He did not flinch at the sight of her violet blood or the strange texture of her skin. Good job, Stanley said softly. You have good hands, Piper. The boy beamed a flash of pure pride that lit up the gloomy hold. He packed the kit and scampered off to help Ketch, who was sorting herbs on a side table. Eva watched him go. Then she turned to Stanley. You are training him, she said. I am giving him something to do, Stanley replied. In a crisis, helplessness kills you faster than the cold. If he feels useful, he won't panic. He is weak, Eva said, but the bite was gone from her voice. It was an observation, not a judgment. Physically, but he adapts. That is the human superpower, Stanley said, sitting back on his heels. We are soft. We break easy. So we learn to stitch ourselves back together. And when we run out of stitches, we hold on to each other until the bleeding stops. Eva looked around the cargo hold. Mara was humming a tune as she worked. Ketch was explaining the properties of moss to Piper. Oren was asleep in a corner, wrapped in 3 blankets. It was a chaotic, fragile little ecosystem. You have built a nest, Eva said. She picked up a thick woolen blanket that Stanley had left for her. She ran the fabric through her claws. Pillows, blankets, warm drinks. You surround yourselves with layers of comfort. She looked at Stanley, her eyes narrowing in genuine confusion. Is it strategic you cushion the environment to reduce caloric burn? Stanley laughed. It felt good to laugh. No. Well, maybe a little, but mostly it is just nice. Nice, Eva repeated the word, as if it were a foreign concept. In the fleet, comfort is a distraction. A warrior sleeps on a hard surface to remain alert. You humans, you weaponize softness. Stanley reached out and adjusted the blanket over her shoulders. We call it comfort, Eva. And it is not a weapon. It is a shield. It is lethal to despair. If you are warm, if you are fed, if you feel safe, then you can wake up tomorrow and fight again. If you sleep on the floor every night, eventually, you just stop waking up. Eva pulled the blanket tighter around herself. She looked at the heater. It is agreeable, she admitted softly. The softness. Do not get used to it, Stanley teased gently. Once we save the world, you have to go back to being a scary admiral. I am still scary, Eva grumbled, sinking slightly into the warmth of the wool. Terrifying, Stanley agreed. The moment was interrupted by a rhythmic thudding from the airlock. It was not the wind. It was a code. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Stanley stiffened. Mara lights. The cargo hold went dark, instantly. Eva rolled away from the heater, a jagged piece of metal pipe appearing in her hand, a makeshift blade. Stanley grabbed the stun baton. The airlock hissed. The inner door groaned open. A figure stepped into the shadows. They were wrapped in a heavy parka, their face obscured by a frost mask. Do not shoot, a voice wheezed. I brought jam. Stanley lowered the baton. Harper. Mediator. Harper Sloane pulled off her mask. She looked exhausted. Her face was gray, dark circles bruised under her eyes. She was carrying a satchel that looked heavy enough to contain rocks. Strawberry jam, Harper said, holding up a jar. And antibiotics. And the new treaty draft. She collapsed onto a crate. Stanley was at her side instantly, checking her pulse. I am fine. Harper waved him off. Just winded. The walk from the perimeter is brisk. How did you find us? Eva asked, stepping out of the shadows. I tracked the heat signature of Mara's welding torch, Harper said. Rook's sensors missed it because he is looking for a large reactor bloom. I was looking for a soldering iron. Smart, Mara said, sliding down the ladder. I like her. Harper looked at the group. You have been busy. Halden Rook has declared you all enemies of the state. He has pasted your faces on every screen in the colony. What are they saying? Stanley asked. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Harper sighed. She opened her satchel and pulled out a data slate. She handed it to Stanley. See for yourself. The screen showed a news feed. It was a recording of Rook standing in front of the storm spire. He looked heroic, windswept, the protector of the people. The traitor Dr. Stanley, Rook's voice intoned, has conspired with the alien aggressors to sabotage our heat grid. He has kidnapped a lupine admiral to hold as a hostage, hoping to force a conflict. He is not a healer. He is a saboteur. He has turned against his own kind. Stanley stared at the screen. Kidnapped, I saved her life. The narrative does not care about the truth, Stanley, Harper said softly. It cares about fear. People are cold. Their heaters are failing. Rook is telling them that you are the reason they are freezing. And the lupines? Eva asked. What does my admiralty say? They are confused, Harper said. Rook told them you were captured by a human terrorist cell, led by Stanley. He says if they attack, you die. He is using you as a shield to keep your fleet in orbit while he prepares the spire, Eva hissed. He paralyzes both sides with lies. It is worse, Harper said. She took a breath, the cold air of the ship misting in front of her. Rook sent an ultimatum an hour ago, to both the Hearth Assembly and the Admiralty. She tapped the slate. A new document appeared. It was short, brutal, and official. Terms of Resolution 1. The immediate surrender of the traitor Stanley and the alien combatant Eva. 2. In exchange for these prisoners, Stormspire Security will release emergency thermal reserves to the civilian sectors for the duration of the storm. 3. If the prisoners are not surrendered within 12 hours, the thermal grid will be shut down to conserve power for essential defense protocols. The silence in the cargo hold was absolute. He is holding the heat hostage, Mara whispered. He is going to freeze the colony to death unless they give us up. Stanley felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Piper. He thought of the hundreds of patients in the sector, the elderly, the sick, the children. Without the auxiliary heat, they would not survive the night. I have to go back, Stanley said. His voice was hollow. No, Eva said sharply. Read the terms, Eva. He will turn off the grid. People will die. My patients will die. If you go back, Eva said, standing up to her full height, he will kill you, and then he will turn on the Great Howl anyway. You are not a bargaining chip, Stanley. You are a loose end. She is right, Harper said. Rook doesn't want prisoners. He wants a public execution. He needs to show that he solved the crisis so he can keep the emergency powers forever. Stanley paced the floor. He felt trapped, not by the ice, but by the logic of the trap. So what do? We sit here in our warm ship while the colony freezes. They hate me out there, Harper. I can feel it. I spent 10 years fixing their broken bones and birthing their babies, and now I am the monster who stole the heat. He stopped pacing and leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the hull. I am a symbol of everything they fear. The crew fell silent. They didn't know how to answer that. It was the heavy, crushing truth of politics. It could take a good man and twist him into a villain with just a few words. Slowly, the others drifted away, giving him space. Mara went back to the welder, though she didn't turn it on. Piper sat with Ketch. Harper began reviewing the treaty documents, looking for a loophole that didn't exist. Stanley stood alone in the shadows. He felt a presence beside him. He didn't turn. He knew who it was. The smell of ozone and wet wool was distinctive. Eva did not speak. She did not offer a warrior's platitude about honor or sacrifice. She simply stood there. She placed her back against the wall next to him, shoulder to shoulder. She was tall, solid, and warm. She breathed in a slow, rhythmic cadence that matched his own. "They are wrong," Eva said finally. "It does not matter if they are wrong," Stanley whispered. "It matters what they believe." "It matters to me," Eva said. She reached into the pocket of her tunic. She pulled out a cylindrical metal tube. It was sealed with red wax and the stamp of the High Admiralty. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Stanley looked at it. "A scroll case. It is a classified dispatch. Rank Omega. It was given to me before I launched. I was ordered to open it only if I made contact with the resonant target." Stanley stiffened. "The target. That is me, isn't it?" "Yes," Eva said. She turned the tube over in her hands. "I have carried this for 2 days. I have not opened it." "Why not?" "Because," Eva said, looking at the seal. "Orders are absolute. In the Admiralty we do not question. We execute. If I open this, I am no longer Eva. I am an instrument of the state. I become a weapon again." She looked at Stanley. Her golden eyes were soft, vulnerable, in a way he had never seen. "I like being Eva," she whispered. "I like sitting by the heater. I like that you gave me a blanket. If I open this, nothing stays simple. If I open this, I might be ordered to kill you. Or capture you. Or worse. Or worse. Or use you," she said. Stanley looked at the tube, then at his own chest. He reached up and touched the fabric of his shirt, tracing the scar underneath. "I think," Stanley started, his voice trembling. "I think I was used a long time ago, Eva. This scar, the scanner in the tunnel rook said I fit the lock. Why do I fit the lock?" "I do not know," Eva lied. It was a gentle lie, but Stanley heard the edge in it. She suspected, but she wouldn't say it. "Open it," Stanley said. Eva shook her head. "No." "Eva, we are running out of time. Rook is going to freeze the colony. If there is anything in that tube, any leverage, any information, we need it." "If it orders me to hurt you," Eva said fiercely, "I will disobey. And then, I will be a traitor too. I will have no home to return to." "You have a home here," Stanley said. He reached out and took her hand. Her claws were retracted. Her palm was rough, calloused, and incredibly warm. "The lantern, the nest, us. You are already part of the family, Admiral. You can't get fired if you quit." Eva looked at their joined hands. A shudder went through her, not from cold, but from emotion. The terrifying realization that she was choosing a human doctor over her entire civilization. "You are a dangerous man, Stanley," she murmured. "You make treason sound like an invitation to dinner." She did not open the tube. She shoved it back into her pocket. "Not yet," she said. "I will open it when we are at the spire, when I can look Rook in the eye. But not here, not in our home." She squeezed his hand, a pressure that could have crushed bone, but instead offered infinite support. "We do not hide anymore," Eva said. "We go back." Suddenly, Oren's voice piped up from the corner. The boy was sitting up, his eyes wide and completely white. He was in a trance. "It is time," Oren said. His voice echoed, sounding like two people speaking at once. Stanley and Eva broke apart and rushed to him. "Oren, what is it?" "The math," Oren said, pointing at the air, as if he could see the magnetic field lines. "I finished the count. The aurora is peaking. The cycle is complete. When? Stanley demanded. When does the great howl hit? Orin blinked his eyes, returning to normal. He looked terrified. 58 minutes, Orin whispered. At exactly midnight. The aurora will synchronize with the beacon. Rook doesn't even have to turn the dial anymore. Gravity will do the rest. 58 minutes, Harper Sloane said, checking her watch. It takes 40 minutes to get to the spire from here if we run. Then we run, Mara said, grabbing her welder. I am not freezing to death in a tin can. I want to punch someone. The lantern will not survive the great howl, Eva stated. The acoustic resonance will shatter the ice shelf. This ship will be crushed. Stanley looked at his group. His found family. Piper, who was bravely packing bandages. Mara, who was ready to fight a war with a welding torch. Ketch, who was mixing the last of the stimulant herbs. Harper, who had risked her career to bring them jam and truth. Orin the boy who heard the sky, and Eva, the wolf who learned to like blankets. We are not staying here to die, Stanley said. He zipped up his parka. He picked up his medical bag. It felt lighter than before. We are going to the storm spire, Stanley announced. We are going to walk in the front door. We are going to broadcast the truth. And we are going to shut that noise off forever. And Halden Rook, Harper asked. He has an army. Stanley looked at Eva. We have an admiral, Stanley said. Eva grinned. It was a predator's grin, sharp and terrifying, but for the first time it was directed entirely at the threat facing her pack. I will clear the path, Eva promised. Piper, you stay here with Orin, Stanley ordered. Keep the heater on. If we don't come back in 2 hours. You will come back, Piper said stubbornly. I will make tea. It will be ready. Stanley ruffled the boy's hair. Make it strong. He turned to the airlock. He opened the door. The cold wind howled a precursor to the devastation to come. But inside the lantern, the warmth held. Let's go, Stanley said. We have an appointment with history. They stepped out into the ice, leaving the safety of the ship behind. They moved not as refugees, but as a unit. A strange, mismatched, desperate little army marching toward the end of the world. As they ran through the tunnels, Stanley felt the scar on his chest burning. It was a low, throbbing heat pulsing in time with the storm spire. He knew with a sinking dread that the answers waiting for him in the tower would change everything. He knew that the classified order in Eva's pocket was a loaded gun. But as he looked at Eva, running beside him, matching his pace, he knew one other thing. He wasn't shaking anymore. The wind outside the storm spire was no longer just air. It was a physical wall of noise, a screaming barrier that separated the living from the dead. The aurora overhead had twisted into a knot of violent violet and bruised green, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the mechanical thrum of the beacon. They stood at the service entrance, the heavy blast doors vibrating against their palms. 58 minutes, Dr. Stanley said. He checked his wrist chrono, though the numbers were meaningless, against the sheer weight of the moment. Technically, 57 now. The group huddle was tight, a circle of breath clouds in the freezing air. This was it, the point of no return. We split here, Stanley said, his voice struggling to stay steady. Mara, you take the subgrid. If you can kill the power to the external dampeners, the spire loses its shielding. That gives Harper a clear signal. Mara adjusted the strap of her welding rig. She looked terrified, her grease-stained face pale, but she cracked a grin that was all teeth and nerves. Kill the shields. Fry the grid. Try not to get electrocuted. Standard Tuesday. Harper, Stanley turned to the mediator. You need to be ready. Once the shields drop, you have maybe 30 seconds to hijack the public frequency before Rook reroutes the signal. You have to broadcast the logs. All of them. Harper Sloane nodded. She was clutching the data drive like a holy relic. I will make them listen, Stanley. I will read every line of his treason to the whole moon. Orin, Stanley looked at the boy. You are the canary. Watch the rhythm. If the great howl spikes before we reach the core, you signal us. We need to know if we are running out of time. I can hear it, Orin whispered. His eyes closed, his head tilted toward the sky. It is hungry. It wants to shout. Piper, Stanley said, turning to the last member of their ragged little army. The boy was shivering, not from cold, but from the terrifying responsibility placed on his small shoulders. You have the most important job. You take the civilians. Get them to the deep caves in Sector 4. If we fail, if the howl hits, the caves are the only place the sound won't reach. Piper grabbed Stanley's sleeve. You come back. You promise to drink the tea. I never break a promise about tea, Stanley lied. It was a gentle lie, the kind parents told children during bombardments. He turned to Eva. She was standing apart from the group, staring at the black obsidian tower that loomed above them. She had no weapon but her body, no armor but her resolve. The wind whipped her fur, but she stood like a statue carved from the ice itself. Ready, Admiral? Stanley asked. Eva looked at him. Her golden eyes were clear, focused, and terrifyingly calm. I am the blade, she said simply. Point me. Stanley hit the door release. The hydraulic seals hissed, screaming, as they fought the pressure differential. The doors slid open, revealing the dark, cavernous throat of the storm spire. They stepped inside. The interior of the spire was a cathedral of malice. The walls were lined with rows of harmonic resonators, massive tuning forks of black metal that hummed with a sound just on the edge of human hearing. The air smelled of ozone and sterilized dust. We go up, Stanley said. The central control deck is at the apex. They ran. They moved through the labyrinth of corridors, bypassing patrols that had been drawn away by the decoy explosions Mara had set in the lower levels. They climbed stairwells that seemed to stretch into infinity. As they neared the top, the sound changed. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a voice, a rhythmic pounding chant that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Thump, thump, thump. It is the heartbeat, Eva gasped, clutching her chest. The beacon is mimicking a biological heart rate. It is trying to sync with us. Fight it, Stanley ordered, grabbing her arm to keep her moving. It is just noise. It is just physics. They burst through the final set of doors and onto the observation deck. It was a vast circular chamber, with a panoramic view of the storm outside. In the center of the room stood the core, a pillar of pure crystalline light that extended through the ceiling and into the sky. And arranged around the core were the high-ranking officers of Storm Spire Security, standing at attention. In front of them, standing at a podium, as if addressing a congregation, was Commissioner Halden Rook. He turned as they entered. He didn't look surprised. He looked disappointed. Doctor, Rook said. His voice was amplified by the room's acoustics booming from every direction. You have a bad habit of interrupting important meetings. Meeting, Stanley shouted, stepping forward. You are not holding a meeting, Halden. You are holding a wake. You are about to brain-dead half the population. Rook smiled. He gestured to the window, to the swirling chaos of the aurora. I am creating unity, Stanley. Look at them out there. The Hearth Assembly, the Lupine Admiralty. They are bickering. They are hoarding resources. They are children fighting over a toy. But when the Great Howl speaks, they will stop fighting. They will be too afraid to fight. Fear is the only language that translates perfectly across species. That is not unity, Eva snarled, her voice, dropping into a predator's register. That is subjugation. It is order, Rook roared, losing his composure for the first time. And I will not let a savage and a traitor dismantle it. He snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the upper gantry, 4 heavy drones dropped down. They were riot suppression units, equipped with sonic cannons and containment foam. Eva, Stanley said quietly. Go. Eva moved. It was not a run. It was a blur. She crossed the 50 feet between the door and the drones in a heartbeat. She hit the first drone with a shoulder check that shattered its gyroscopic stabilizer. It spun away, crashing into the wall. The second drone fired a sonic blast. Eva didn't dodge. She took the hit, her fur rippling from the impact, and used the momentum to spin her claws, tearing through the drone's sensor array. But Rook had prepared. He pressed a button on the podium. Vents in the floor hissed open. A cloud of orange dust erupted into the room. "Howl dust!" Stanley yelled, covering his face with his sleeve. "Do not breathe it!" It was too late. The pheromone cloud filled the chamber instantly. Eva froze mid-strike. Her back arched. The dust hit her lungs, and the chemical accelerant slammed into her brain, stripping away the layers of logic and discipline. The great howl, amplified by the dust, roared in her ears. She screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She turned her eyes, burning with a blinding gold light. She looked at the remaining drones, and then she looked at Stanley. She didn't see a friend. She saw movement. She saw meat. "Eva!" Stanley shouted, backing away as she stalked toward him. "Eva, listen to me. It is the dust," Rook laughed. "You see, Doctor, you cannot tame them. You can only leash them. Or put them down," Eva lunged. Stanley dropped to the floor, sliding under her leap. He could feel the wind of her claws passing inches from his face. He scrambled toward the control console on the far wall. He didn't go for a weapon. He went for the environmental controls. Ventilation, he muttered, his fingers flying over the keypad. Override, emergency flush. The system was locked. "Access denied," the computer chirped. "Authorization required." Eva was turning around. She was growling, a low, rumbling sound that shook the floor. She was crouching for the kill. Stanley looked at the scanner on the console. It was the same spiral design as the one in the tunnel. The same geometric lock. "They made you to fit," Rook's voice echoed. "Go ahead, Stanley. Show her what you are." Stanley didn't have a choice. He slammed his hand onto the scanner. The console lit up green. Resonant authority recognized. "Flush the room!" Stanley screamed at the machine. The massive exhaust fans in the ceiling roared to life. The suction was incredible. The orange dust was ripped upward, sucked out of the chamber, and into the storm. The air cleared. Eva halted. She shook her head, violently coughing. The red haze in her vision receded. She looked down at her hands, claws extended, ready to tear Stanley apart. "Stanley," she whispered, horror flooding her voice. "I am okay," Stanley panted, standing up. "I am okay. You are back. Stay back." Rook stared at Stanley. "You used it. You actually used it." "Shut it down," Stanley commanded the computer. "Deactivate the beacon." Command. Acknowledged. Initiating shutdown sequence. The humming in the walls died. The light in the central crystal flickered and dimmed. The heartbeat stopped. Rook's face twisted in rage. He pulled a sidearm from his coat, a heavy kinetic pistol. "You think flipping a switch changes anything?" Rook screamed. "The aurora is still peaking. The physics are still in motion. You cannot stop the sky." He raised the gun, aiming at Eva. "No!" Stanley shouted. But before Rook could pull the trigger, the room was filled with a new sound. It wasn't the howl. It was a voice. Harper Sloane's voice. It was coming from every speaker in the room, every speaker in the spire, every radio in the colony. "Citizens of Galehorn, this is Mediator Sloane. The emergency is a lie. Commissioner Rook is manually manipulating the beacon. We have the logs. We have the proof. He is not saving you. He is experimenting on you." Rook froze. He looked at the comms panel. His secure channels were flooding with messages from the Hearth Assembly and the Admiralty. His own guards were lowering their weapons, looking at each other in confusion. "It is over, Halden," Stanley said, stepping between Rook and Eva. "The world is watching." Rook looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the dimmed crystal. He looked at Stanley, the man who shouldn't exist, the anomaly. "You destroyed it," Rook whispered. "You destroyed the only order we had." He didn't fire. He couldn't. The doors to the observation deck burst open. A squad of Stormspire security rushed in, but their weapons were pointed at Rook. "Commissioner," the lead officer said, his voice shaking. "We have orders from the Assembly. You are to stand down." Rook dropped the gun. It clattered on the metal floor. Ava slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She was shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline dump was hitting her all at once. Stanley was at her side in a second. Ava, look at me." "I almost," she gasped, tears streaming down her fur-covered face. "I almost killed you. Again." "But you didn't," Stanley said firmly. He grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. Think about the lantern. Think about the tea Piper is making. It is going to be too sweet because he puts in 5 sugars. Think about Mara's terrible singing." "5 sugars," Eva repeated, latching onto the detail. "He puts in 5 sugars." "Exactly," Stanley said. "We are going home, Ava. It is done." But as he helped her up, Stanley felt a cold dread in his stomach. He looked at the console where his hand had just unlocked the system. He looked at the spiral symbol. Rook was being handcuffed, but as he was dragged away, he looked back at Stanley. He didn't look defeated. He looked vindicated. "Ask her, Doctor," Rook called out. "Ask the Admiral why she really crashed near your tent. Ask her what is in her pocket." Stanley froze. He looked at Eva. Eva wouldn't meet his eyes. The return to the lantern was a blur of exhaustion. The storm was still raging outside, but the howl was gone. The silence was beautiful. They entered the airlock of the old ship. The warmth hit them like a physical embrace. Piper was there running to hug Stanley's legs. Mara was cheering. Ketch was clapping. But Stanley walked through them like a ghost. He went straight to the cargo hold, to the small partitioned area they had set up as a private medical bay. "Ava," he said. His voice was flat. Eva followed him. She looked older than he had ever seen her. She stepped into the small room. She turned and locked the door. The mechanical click was the loudest sound in the world. She stood there for a long moment, the air heavy between them. Then she spoke. "Undress," she whispered. Stanley stood still. He tried to summon his usual deflection, his shield of humor. "You really choose the worst timing for romance, Admiral," he said. But the joke fell dead on the floor. His voice cracked. Eva didn't smile. She didn't scold him. She just looked at him with an infinite, crushing sadness. "Please," she said. Stanley slowly unzipped his parka. He pulled off his thermal tunic. He stood bare-chested in the warm light of the heater. The scar on his chest was glowing. It wasn't a burn scar. It never had been. Now, in the aftermath of the connection with the spire, the tissue was translucent, revealing a complex latticework of bioluminescent filaments underneath the skin. It was a circuit board woven into his flesh, a perfect spiral. Eva walked over to him. She didn't touch the mark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the metal tube. The classified dispatch. She broke the seal. The red wax crumbled onto the floor. She pulled out the scroll. It was not paper. It was a thin sheet of memory glass. She handed it to him. "Read it," she said. Stanley took the glass. It lit up at his touch. Subject Asset 404. Stanley Jonas Classification. Omega Origin. Thaw Accord. Secret. Annex B Summary. Subject is a genetically modified resonant, created under the Joint Project Silencer initiative 10 years ago. Subject's neural architecture has been altered to act as a biological kill switch for the Stormspire beacon. Subject's memory of the procedure has been suppressed via trauma masking. See Reactor Accident cover story. Mission Order. In the event of political instability or beacon malfunction, the Lupine Admiralty is authorized to secure the asset. The asset is to be transported to the Spire to perform the final resonance. Note: This procedure is terminal for the beacon's function, but carries a 90% probability of fatal neural overload for the asset. Status asset is expendable. Mission is priority. Stanley read the words. Then he read them again. The silence stretched for an eternity. "I am not a person," Stanley whispered. "I am a key. I am a fuse." He looked up at Eva. "You knew." "I suspected," Eva said. Her voice broke. "The crash was not an accident. I was sent to find you. I was sent to secure the asset. But when I saw you when you saved me," she took a step closer, tears filling her golden eyes. "I could not do it, Stanley. I could not open the order because I knew what it would say. I knew that if I acknowledged it, I would have to trade your life for the mission." "Rook knew," Stanley said. "That is why he wanted me. He wanted to control the key." "Rook wanted to use you to control the spire," Eva said. "My government, they want to use you to destroy it. But either way, they are using you." She reached out and took the memory glass from his hand. She crushed it. The shards tinkled onto the floor. "I will not let them," Eva said fiercely. "We will leave. We will take the lantern. We will go into the deep waste where they cannot find us. Piper, Mara, all of us." Stanley looked at the shards of glass. He looked at the glowing mark on his chest. He thought about the 10 years he had spent saving lives, thinking he was doing it to atone for a mistake, only to find out the mistake was a lie planted in his head to hide a weapon. He felt a surge of anger. But beneath the anger, there was something else, a clarity. "No," Stanley said. "Stanley, if you stay, they will force you," Eva argued. "The annex is binding. They will march you into that chamber and make you burn your brain out to silence the beacon forever." "They won't force me," Stanley said. He picked up his shirt and pulled it back on. "Because I am going to volunteer." Eva stared at him. "What did you not read the probability fatal overload? You will die." 90%, Stanley corrected. "I have beaten worse odds. I survived a crash with a lupine Admiral, didn't I?" He walked over to the door and unlocked it. He opened it, revealing the cargo hold, where his family, his real family, the one he chose, was waiting. "I am going to finish it, Eva," Stanley said. "Not because it is an order, not because I am a weapon, but because I am a doctor, and the beacon is a disease. I am going to cure this moon." He turned back to her. "But I have conditions, and you are going to help me enforce them." 2 hours later, the main communications array of Galehorn, now under the control of Harper Sloan, broadcast a new signal. It wasn't a speech from a politician. It was a video feed from the storm spire. Stanley stood in the center of the observation deck. He was flanked by Eva on one side and Harper on the other. Behind them stood the representatives of the Hearth Assembly and the Lupine Admiralty, looking uncomfortable and small. "My name is Dr. Jonas Stanley," he said to the camera. "For 10 years you have known me as the man who patches you up when the cold bites." He unzipped his jacket, revealing the glowing spiral on his chest. "I am also a secret," he said. "A secret kept by both your governments. A human weapon designed to silence an alien tower." He looked directly into the lens. "I am going to turn off the beacon today, permanently. The Great Howl will never threaten you again. But before I do, there is a price." Harper stepped forward, holding a document. "This is the full text of the Thaw Accord, including the secret annexes. It is being uploaded to every public server on the moon right now. No more secrets. No more assets," Stanley continued. "And one more thing. The Thaw Accord is no longer a ceasefire. It is a partnership. The heat lines will be shared equally. The borders are open. If I do this, if I give everything you have to give each other a chance." He turned to the High Admiral of the Lupine Fleet, a towering figure in ceremonial armor who had just landed. "Do we have an agreement, Admiral?" The High Admiral looked at Eva. Eva stood with her hand on the hilt of her blade, her gaze challenging her commander. "We have an agreement," the High Admiral grunted. Stanley nodded. He turned to the crystal. Stanley, Eva whispered. She grabbed his hand. 90%. Stanley squeezed her fingers. I have you to anchor me right. You owe me a life. I owe you everything, she said. Then hold on tight, Stanley said. This is going to be loud. He stepped up to the beacon. He didn't use the console this time. He placed both hands directly onto the crystal surface. The light flared. It was blinding. The energy surged into him. It felt like fire pouring into his veins. He screamed. But in the white-hot agony, he felt a hand gripping his shoulder. He heard a voice, not the howl, but a voice he knew. 5 sugars. The lantern. Undress. He held onto the voice. He held onto the hand. He pushed his own bioresonance into the crystal, fighting the ancient machine will, with his own stubborn human refusal to break. The crystal cracked. A fissure ran up the center of the pillar. The light turned from blue to white and then it shattered. The sound of the beacon died. Not just silenced, but ended. Stanley fell backward. He didn't hit the floor. Eva caught him. He is waking up. The voice was small. Piper. Give him room, another voice said. Gruff. Mara. Stanley opened his eyes. He was not in the spire. He was back in the lantern. He was lying on the cot near the heater. He tried to sit up, but his body felt like it had been run over by a hauler. Easy, Eva's voice came from his left. She was sitting in a chair watching him. She looked tired, but she was smiling. It was a real smile this time. Soft. Did we win? Stanley croaked. The beacon is dead, Eva said. The Assembly and the Admiralty are currently arguing over who gets to pay for the cleanup. It is very civilized. And the annex? Public knowledge, Eva said. You are a hero, Stanley. They are calling you the man who broke the sky. I hate it, Stanley groaned. I just want to be a doctor. You can be both, Eva said. She reached out and took his hand. Your scar is gone, Stanley looked down. The skin on his chest was smooth. The spiral had burned itself out. The light was gone. I am just me, Stanley whispered. Just Stanley. Just Stanley is enough, Eva said. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was a gesture of intimacy, of shared breath of family. The door is locked, she whispered. Stanley laughed a weak, happy sound. Is that an order, Admiral? No, Eva said. It is an invitation. Outside, the wind still blew across the ice of Galehorn. But inside the lantern, the heater hummed the tea was steeping, and for the first time in 100 years, the silence on the moon was not empty. It was full of peace.